Resiliency Within, with host Elaine Miller-Karras, is brought to you by Trauma Resource Institute, Incorporated. Visit traumaresourceinstitute.com.
Welcome to Resiliency Within, featuring your host, Elaine Miller-Karras. In unprecedented times, our beliefs and well-being are put to the test. When we take the things we've learned in life and look at challenges in a whole new way, we learn to develop resiliency, which can then be used to promote healing and personal strength. Now, here is Elaine Miller-Karras.
Welcome to Resiliency Within. I am your host, Elaine Miller-Karras, and the name of today's show is Resilience, a doorway to compassion and a more equitable society. My guest is Dr. Michael Karlin. He is the co-author of Compassion Integrity Training, a secular ethics approach to cultivating personal, social, and environmental flourishing. Michael will illuminate us about the innovative program that also has been adopted by UNESCO, Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development, MGIEP. I'll refer to it in the future because that's a mouthful, Michael, to say that all at one time. And Michael Karlin is an assistant professor of psychology at Life University in the Positive Human Development and Social Change Department and the associate director of the Life University Center for Compassion, Integrity, and Secular Ethics. Karlin received his PhD in religious studies and a graduate certificate in Jewish studies from Emory University in 2014. His dissertation, which sounds so interesting, and I hope you'll illuminate a little bit about that today with us, is an ethnographic study of 2 Jewish life coaching programs that blend psychology, religion, and contemplative practice in order to provide resources with which individuals can construct moral selves and heal psychological wounds. And Michael is also the founder and the president of the Mythic Imagination Institute, a nonprofit dedicated to the interdisciplinary study of myth and ritual and how it functions in daily life. He served as the chairman of the executive board of the Alliance for a New Humanity, an international nonprofit organization founded by 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners and Deepak Chopra that attempted to address pressing international issues by bridging the spheres of politics, economics, and religion. And there's more. I have to say this about you. You're an active real estate investor and co-founder of Security First National Bank, the world's first internet bank, and S1 Corporation, once the world's leading provider of financial portal solutions. And I'm going to add this one. It wasn't in the bio that you sent to me, but you're also a certified community resiliency model teacher. So Michael, welcome. So
that's a good point. I need to add that.
I know, I just had to add that to this wonderful, brief bio about you. But, as we're starting today, what is on your mind as we begin?
Well, let me say a couple of things before I start, which is, first of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction.
You're welcome.
Second of all, I hope the internet's stable. We've been talking for a while now, and it's been perfect. And then all of a sudden, it started, chopping up a little bit. So hopefully, it'll all work out just perfectly.
Sometimes the gods of the internet have their own way to be. So we'll just have to see. So let's hope.
Well, I'll say, and I'll speak more about this later, but this is why we learn the CRIM skills, right? So that we can handle stress and things that we may not be prepared for. But so what's on my mind? It's interesting. I think one of the things that's on my mind really every day right now is the need for ongoing practice. And that if we're really going to have the impact that we want to have on the world, whether it's with resiliency skills like we incorporate with CRIM, whether it's in cultivating greater self-compassion, compassion for others, or ultimately in creating more just and equitable systems, we have to do this on a daily basis. It can't be just something where you go to a training for a weekend or a week or 10 weeks, whatever it is, and then you've like downloaded it all and you've transformed. The real transformation happens in the small daily practices that you do. And so the thing that we've been, we focused for many, many years on developing the curriculum and the training and facilitator training. Now we're really, really emphasizing that ongoing practice and how do we create ways to enable people to have access to practice and and to integrate it into their lives, because I think that's where the magic happens.
Well, I think that also practices are wide and varied. There's some that you need to have a quiet space so that you can have time for for reflection, for prayer and meditation. And then I think there's the other kinds of practices that we can integrate into the activities of daily living that we might be able to access our well-being in a faster way, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so, but I think we need both. And I know that with the compassion integrity training, that you have really combined a lot of different practices in order for people to kind of enhance their bandwidth of the kinds of things that can help them. So
Yes.
I want to talk more about the CIT training, but there's a couple questions I want to ask you. And many people don't understand what the word secular means. What does it mean that the CIT is based on a secular approach?
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you asked me that. I didn't even provide that in advance, so I'm glad you just. So secular, the way we understand it, is really welcoming and all inclusive. It just means that we're not taking one particular religious stance or another, that the practices and skills that we're teaching don't come from any one tradition or another. We base it on a model of secular ethics, which is that everything that we teach can be grounded in common sense, common experience, and science. So common sense is just, when you talk to someone and say, would you be happier if you had more gratitude in your life? Would you feel better if you could stay resilient in more stressful situations and dealing with the kinds of things you're doing? So that's kind of a common sense. The common experience is we all, for example, have an autonomic nervous system, as you talk about a lot. We all respond to stress. We may respond somewhat differently, but we have basic ways of responding to stress that are programmed into our bodies. And so that's a common experience that no matter what religion we are, we can share that. And then finally, a science where we can look at what are the effects, and this is expanding, our ability to do this is expanding more and more every day, which is what are the actual effects of practicing these skills, like the skills in CRIM or like the skills in CIT. So the metaphor that we love to use, and the Dalai Lama has suggested this metaphor, is like the metaphor of water and tea. So secular ethics is the water, right? We all need water. We all need it to survive. It's kind of it, and it flows through everybody. But then there's tea, and some people like tea, some people don't like tea. There's various kinds of tea. So as he says, tea is very important in his life, right? He's a Buddhist monk, obviously a very high monk, but
Yes.
he's a Buddhist monk, and so that's his flavor of the water that he is living every day, and that's great. But he wants to be able to find that water that connects all of us. So when we say secular, we're really looking at it from that perspective, so that we have people who have taken CIT who are people who are atheists, people who are practicing Muslims, Christians, Jews, every flavor of religion all across the world. But it seems the amazing thing is everybody seems to connect with what we're talking about because it is so common.
And so the practices in CIT can be integrated in your spiritual and religious practices, and really what you mentioned many practices. So
Yes,
then it becomes like water is universal, and that we need water for survival. So
100%.
yes, and so the other question that I have to start out with too is, I've been asking my guests their definition of the word resilience. And so could you share with us how you would define resilience as you refer to it within your CIT training?
Absolutely. And being a crim teacher, having been trained by you, it's a little intimidating. So,
Well,
but
I
I will
don't know
say
about that.
we generally talk about resilience as multifold. One is the ability to bounce back from adversity, and not just bounce back in many cases, but actually to have post-traumatic growth, to be able to kind of use those kinds of experiences in order to be able to grow. And then it's also the ability to stay within that resilient zone, as you talk about, the ability to stay resilient in the face of increasing levels of stress or trauma or whatever it is you may be going towards. So I think resilience can be both things. It's both that bouncing back, but also staying grounded in the sense in the face of adversity and things of that nature.
And I think that, yeah, thank you for that definition. And I think the other aspect that I've been pondering more of late too is some people who have come from communities that have been marginalized have shared with me that they don't want to bounce back to where they were before. But I think
Exactly.
that
Yep.
when you interweave the idea of post-traumatic growth and what you want to decide that you've learned from your lived experience to be able to create a better now and future,
Yep.
that's what I kind of heard what you said, and I think
Yeah, I
that's an
love that.
important thing to kind of to underscore.
I
And
love
so,
that.
Michael, we've known each other, and I was teasing you before we started about, I'm going, gosh, I'd never read your resume before, your CV, and you've done so many different things. But, I know for you to do the work that you do, and I know you to be such a kind, generous man. Could you share a personal story of what has inspired you, of your, in terms of your lived experience, to be so passionate about bringing compassion into the world in the way that you do?
Yeah, there are many different stories. I think, and it's one of those things where when you look back on your life, you're like, oh, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and oh, that happened for this reason, that happened. So there's many of those. One of the things I will share though is I went into the university and I started studying psychology, and I thought that that would be something that I would want to do. I then kind of fell into a bigger cultural narrative about a man's role and business and needing to excel at business to kind of have a sense of worth and things of that nature. So I decided to use my psychology degree. I did, by the way, go into the business school for one semester, and I said, I want nothing to do with this. If I only have a few years to study, I want to study art and literature and psychology and all of these wonderful things. But in any event, when I graduated, I kind of fell into this mold of needing to be this entrepreneur. And when I was able to find some success in that, I realized my wife and I used to joke. She's a social worker, and my wife and I used to joke. She would say, well, I'm doing something that's really beneficial for the world. And I would say, well, I am too. I'm allowing people to pay their bills online. I mean, isn't that convenient? Like, what a great service I'm doing. And but instead, actually, I recognized that I was only doing it for money, for status, for all of these things that were these kind of external sources of happiness. And I was actually quite miserable doing it, even though from the outside it looked like everything was, just as it should be.
So you had all
And
the
I
successes in the world, and you had the money that you needed, yet there was something missing on the inside.
terrible. And I
Yeah.
would literally, we would pour ourselves into these transactions, and then when they were done, I would sit and look, like, stare out into space thinking, is this it? Like, is this why I did all this? And it just didn't feel right. So I was blessed early in my career to say, I'm getting out of here. I got to do something different. This is not what I want my contribution to the world to be. And then in 1999 is when I decided to leave the organization. And then I started the Mythic Imagination Institute, and I went to graduate school, and I did my dissertation and all these other wonderful things that happened.
You
So
have, if you could see him, he has a smile on his face as he's talking about this. So that was the right decision. It sounds like that was
that was
the right one,
absolutely
out
the
of
right
that
decision.
came out of, I imagine, a lot of suffering.
It did. It did. And a lot of really questioning my purpose, my meaning. Yeah, it was a pretty dark place. So
So, well, thank you for sharing that story. I don't know if I've heard quite that story
no.
about your lived experience. And so, I want to, kind of segue now and talk maybe a little bit more about CIT. And um, I want to ask you another question. So, why did you choose to emphasize resilience and resilience skills through the CIT? Which I'll be
So
using that acronym instead of saying compassion
yes,
training every time.
yes,
Yes,
yes, yes,
CIT.
yes.
Okay.
Um, so as you know, I met you through our dear friend Brendan Ozawa de Silva.
Yes, yes.
And like many things in my life, I give him credit for the right decisions I've made. And so he's a dear friend. And when we began to start thinking, we were together at Life University. We were co-founders of the Center for Compassion, Integrity, and Secular Ethics, along with several others at the university. And we started thinking about creating a new program. He really, right from the beginning, said we need to incorporate resiliency skills. And one of the things that he shared, and I know he's talked to you about too, is that we kind of come at this, especially in the kind of hype of mindfulness and mindfulness meditation and all these different things, that it's a one size fits all solution. That all you need to do is sit quietly, focus on your breath, and then eventually you're going to feel this kind of bliss, or you'll feel some sort of happiness. And what he realized from doing the work he was doing is that not everyone can do that. Different people need, as you said, different practices, different avenues. And it was his work. We do a lot of work now together, but in prisons. And it was his work in prisons that really kind of lit up the light bulb. Is that when you're in a place where your fight or flight is on high alert, and you're always kind of up in the high zone because of your circumstances, just asking someone to sit quietly and close their eyes can be a very threatening thing. And I have found this, it used to be in early days when I was teaching meditation, it would be like, well, something's wrong with this person because they can't really do, everyone should be able to meditate. Look, it's benefited me so much. Why shouldn't it just benefit them? And Brendan helped me by virtue of working with you to see that, you know what, there are a set of skills that are really embodied. We lose touch with the body so much in our culture and through these practices sometimes, that really getting ourselves grounded back in the body, understanding sensation, that these are all skills that are really incredibly important for people. And now it's, while this kind of started with this experience of working in with incarcerated populations, we recognize that this is for everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody needs these. I need these. I mean, we've now, even though we have multiple different kinds of practices in every one of each one of our skills, we have at the beginning of every recorded meditation practice, and even in the writing exercises, an instruction that before you start, you should either do some grounding, do some resourcing, and that if at any time during the practice you feel dysregulated, you should return to that if you feel comfortable doing that. So it's part and parcel of the DNA of every practice, because it's such a kind of a core, that strength of resiliency is such a core of the program now.
Well, and as you talk about that, someone shared with me recently, reminded me actually of we did a training at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles a number of years ago, probably 7 years ago. And there was a person in the training who said, "Oh, I realize my body's been talking to me my entire life, but I didn't know how to talk back." And I
Oh,
thought, what a brilliant statement, because I
that
think
is
that is
gorgeous.
what you're doing, is you're helping people understand what happens within their body. And if they do want to journal, or they want to do a mindfulness practice, a meditation or prayer, that sometimes what's happening on the inside can take us off that road and bump us off. And if we can get back
Exactly.
on through some simple practices that you just described, that then you can continue with your journaling and continue with your mindfulness practice. Because I also want to, reinforce with our listeners that mindfulness can be that thing for many people, where they can find for the
Absolutely.
first time in their life, a sense of calm and peace. And it can be so transformative, but like you said, not for everyone. And so that's the exciting part, that we can say, oh, but we also have this, so that one person that you might have thought, oh, there's something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with them. There's something
Exactly.
actually right with them, but maybe something happened to them. When we talk about being trauma
Exactly.
informed, that may be that when they close their eyes or even pay attention to their breath, that reminds them of something that was not so pleasant that happened to them when they were smaller, that actually was connected to being traumatized by something. So that actually becomes a cue that sends them into maybe even a traumatic flashback.
Yes.
So I mean, I know that I've spoken to Brendan Ozawa Silva. He was on the show earlier in last month. So that component is so important in the work that he does and the work that I do, and certainly now in CIT, and how you're bringing it into the world in such a wide way. So, another question that I'd like to ask you is that, how do you think the resiliency skills, because I know there's so much, focus on being compassionate, how does it cultivate greater compassion and help to motivate us to create a more peaceful and equitable world, which I know that's your vision
Yeah,
and
no,
purpose.
great question. And it's related to the conversation we just had. So, first of all, if I can be more resilient and I can be paying attention to what's going on the inside, and as you said, if I start to feel like I'm getting knocked out, I have the tools to bring myself back. Number one, it can give me access to practices that I might not otherwise have access to because of the inability or the feeling I have of being knocked up high or knocked down low while I'm trying to do the practice. So knowing that I have that, I can begin a practice using resourcing, and it settles my body and mind. Then makes me more present to the kinds of practices that we're suggesting people use to cultivate compassion both for themselves and for others, and also to create a more equitable world. But the other thing is two other components to that. One is, by virtue of starting with resiliency skills, we're starting with a strengths-based approach, which you just touched on.
Yes.
It's not about what's wrong with you, it's about what's right with you. And that is such a powerful way to start a program, especially one where people are going to be examining how they can be kinder to themselves, how they can be more forgiving of others, they can be more empathic and more compassionate. All of those things are really important because so often, because of our negativity bias, we get caught in this kind of self-critique, self-criticism. And we've seen people, as they go through the program, return. We help people return over and over again to those resiliency skills and that strengths-based approach, to talk about these are all skills we already have. It's about, how do you want to build on your strength and in order to cultivate this. The second thing I'll mention is just that, um, when we're cultivating compassion, part of what we're doing is we're opening ourselves up to what's going on in the world. And to, to really have compassion for others, the way we define it in the program is, it's the wish to alleviate the suffering or difficulties of another. If I see somebody who is suffering or is in a difficult situation, and I start to feel like a, a response in my body where my heart starts racing and I start to sweat, or I start to get very feelings of anxiety, then oftentimes what will happen is I will turn away from that person in what's called empathic distress. I will turn away from that person because it's too much for me to bear. Or I may do something in service to them, in air quotes, that's really about alleviating my own distress. So instead, what we help people do is we help them go back to the early skills in the program, which include the resourcing and grounding and tracking. And we say to them, when you're experiencing that, maybe you can do some grounding, maybe do some resourcing, do a little bit of the earlier practices that we do, so that you can be present to that suffering. Because if we just turn away from it, then we're never going to have the ability to alleviate it. And then when we move into systems, so that's compassion for others. When we move into systems, it's the same kind of situation, where what we want to be able to do is, now we're not just looking at the difficulties of an individual, we're looking at systemic injustice. We're looking at systems that can feel so overwhelming. How can I be part of a solution for this system? And again, going back to understanding, first of all, that all of us have these strengths. We all have the capacity for compassion. We all have the capacity for resilience. And then to be able to look at those kinds of systemic injustices with courage and strength, because you know you have the capacity to ground yourself and to stay in the resilient zone. And you have the permission, if it's overwhelming, to turn away when you need to.
Well,
But knowing those skills are so important.
right. And, and as you're talking about this, of course, I'm thinking about what's going on in America today. And I was involved in another training earlier. I know you're going to another training after we have this conversation. And the topic that's been on many people's minds is what's happening in Minnesota, regarding the trial of the police officer, regarding the murder of Mr. Floyd. And so as you're talking, I'm thinking about this, because there's been so much suffering. And I have to say, for myself included, there are times when I just can't watch the news any longer. I have to just watch a little bit of it, and then I have to turn away. And so what I'm hoping that maybe we can do, we're going to take a short break in a few minutes, is maybe we can bring this real life experience that many of us are going through right now and apply what you just said to it, maybe illuminate, how do we create a better society? How do we, deal with what you're saying is the structures that existed long before any of us were ever born that we're living with now? And but also the suffering that's palpable to me and really across the board. But what you said about the suffering, about turning away,
Yeah.
I think we're at great risk of that right now because of the oversaturation that's happening probably in every aspect of the media,
Yeah.
and how that is being really, I say, embodied in each and every one of us, of the fear that I'm witnessing, that my friends of color are sharing with me, as well as my own fears
Yeah.
about so many things that are happening in the world. And how do we stay as compassionate beings? I guess that's I'm just an easy
Yeah, it's a
answer
simple
after the
answer.
break.
Exactly right. Exactly.
An easy answer after the break.
We have a couple minutes. We can
We
cover
do. We
that
have
before
a
the
couple
break.
minutes before that happens, but I
Well,
would
one of the
share.
things,
Yes,
well,
go
I was
ahead.
just going to say is as maybe a segue, we can return to it after the break, is the concept of beneficial and what we call beneficial and harmful mental states. And we'll talk about that after the break, but being able to try to start discerning between those two. When is too much, right? When am I just being bombarded by this news where it's not helpful anymore? It's not beneficial to me, and maybe I'm even a little addicted to it, and I need to turn away. It's perfectly legitimate to turn away when you're feeling overwhelmed, and that's actually beneficial as a way of being able to turn back towards it when we need to.
And that's also one of the community resiliency model skills of tracking. How do we know
Yes,
when it's too much, right? So that we can actually
exactly.
sense it in our body and know that it's time for us to maybe do something differently. Um, but then the question I always have, the next question is, well, if you're being bombarded and constantly feeling like, oh, I'm getting out of my zone, I mean, you could end up not wanting to engage.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that to me is the danger. And we're talking about creating a more compassionate, equitable world. That's not, disengagement's not going to create that.
not at all.
Yeah. And so
Not at all.
how do we create more avenues and more opportunities to cultivate that compassion and to create that equitable society that we so believe is possible, even though I know that for many people and many of our listeners, they may not feel it's very equitable at this moment.
Yeah.
So we're going to be taking our short break. And when we return, we'll continue our conversation with the very interesting Dr. Michael Karlin, who has a wide breadth of, as you can see, interests and is really cultivating compassion and ethics really across the globe. And he's going to tell us about the UNESCO project, which I'm very anxious to hear about how that's going in a
Absolutely.
way that's not just within the United States. So
No, not at
so
all.
Michael, that is so exciting. So we'll be back in a few moments, and we will talk more with Dr. Michael Karlin
Thank you so
about his
much.
work in the world.
Thank you so much.
All right, great job. Good first segment. All clear. Back in a couple minutes.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
All right. So anyway, I had today, I have to say, I am recording this, but it's on Zoom. It's not on Facebook Live. But what we
Oh
will
no,
do
okay.
is we
That's
will
okay.
put this recording on Facebook Live, and people will hear it after the fact, which happens when I record a show, for example. We put the recording
Oh
of
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
Zoom
yeah.
on there.
No, that's
So,
great.
but I don't know what happened because I've done this a million times. But when I actually did my Facebook Live, you could hear, right?
Well, the funny thing is, it
I
says
don't.
on my screen, it says live on Facebook.
Well, maybe it's still doing Facebook, so maybe we're okay.
We'll
So
find
just to
out.
know that we're perhaps on Facebook, and if you are, welcome, listeners. You can see I'm with this most talented and interesting person here, Dr. Michael Karlin. And I see it says live on Facebook too, but it didn't say that because I actually turned it off. So, but
Yeah.
maybe it's still going. So we'll see. It's been an
Technology
interesting
gods will have their
yes. So
way.
just so if you are listening on Facebook, and we are recording this on Zoom, we had some problems not knowing whether or not we had given the correct Zoom number to the engineers of Voice America. So Michael was very patient with me as I grounded myself, and he helped me to contact the powers to be so I could send them the right Zoom link. So there you go. Because today is the first day, the first show of the beginning of our 52 weeks. So we were renewed and we're so excited. And Dr. Michael Karlin is my first guest on the first 52 weeks. So
I never congratulated you for
well,
this. This is so
thank you.
wonderful.
It has been really a privilege, really, to be with people like you and the people that have been coming to the show, and knowing that we have listeners from really many, not only in the United States but many places across the globe. So
Oh, I can imagine.
yeah,
Yeah, this is such a necessary topic right now. This the subject of this show, the resilience, as you mentioned, what's going on in the United States, but certainly globally. It's yeah, this couldn't come at a better time.
well, and I also I just also hope that you can share this with your people around the globe.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Yeah,
and so we'll also make sure that if it's not on Facebook Live, that you get the recording
we
so
will.
that you
Yeah,
can share. But you'll at least
I,
you'll get the podcast. So Voice America does a lovely job of people being able to listen to the show after it goes live. In fact,
yes,
most people
I've
listen to it.
listened.
Have
Yeah,
you
I've
listened?
listened.
No,
Yes,
oh,
yeah.
you didn't tell me. All
Well, I
right.
had to catch Brendan and Tim, so
Oh, of course. They were wonderful guests, as you are as
they
well.
sure were. Yeah,
Yeah.
I loved listening to
All
both of
right.
them.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we're going to be coming back in about 10 seconds.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
This is Resiliency Within with Elaine Miller-Karras. To reach the show during our live broadcast, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. That's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email to elaine@resiliencywithin.com. Now, back to this week's show.
Welcome back. I'm here with Dr. Michael Karlin. We're having a wonderful conversation regarding compassion and integrity training. And we are going to continue our conversation regarding current events. And how do you see the current events of what's happening in America today in relationship to the work that you're doing in the world, Michael?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is we talked before the break about this kind of idea of turning away. And there are times when, if you're privileged enough to be able to turn away, right? Because we should also embrace the fact and recognize the fact that unfortunately there are those who cannot simply turn away. But if you are privileged enough to be able to turn away, then that's okay as a form of kind of self-care. But it's a turning away to turn back towards the issue, right? Because as you said, turning away is not going to actually solve anything. But that's where the self-care. I haven't really talked a little bit about or a lot about CIT, but CIT begins with 4 skills on self-cultivation. We begin skill 1, which is where we talk about calming body and mind, and that's where we bring in the CRIM skills. But then we build onto that to where we get to self-compassion. And in self-compassion, these are the skills we need to care for the self and be able to be resilient enough to then turn towards others in a whole way and in a compassionate way. And then we move into compassion. Um, One of the things that we do is we separate out compassion from wisdom or discernment. So in this case, one of the things that's really interesting or really important, I think, is to be able to cultivate our compassion, which is our wish to alleviate the suffering of another, but then recognize that in order to really bring that compassion to full fruition, we need to understand systems. And the situation in Minneapolis is really a great example of that, where we're not dealing with an isolated incident, as horrible as it is. That isolated incident is not the whole story. There's a whole system that is in place that is perpetuating that kind of violence. And it's not just a system in place today. It's a system that's built on earlier systems. And so until we really appreciate that, the solution I have may not actually solve anything. And so I think when we start to kind of transition from compassion into what we call wisdom or discernment in our series 3, which is engaging with systems, you begin to see a wider world, and you also begin to break it down in such a way that you can see where you can actually have an effect. Part of empathic distress comes with feeling completely overwhelmed. What can I do? There's nothing I can do. It's too big for me. when we break it down into systems, there's kind of a dialectic that happens. At first, we think, oh my God, it's so complex. But then we start to break it down and realize there are places where I can engage. We actually have some facilitators in Minneapolis, and we've been talking, and this is an area where we can engage. We can engage even if it's on a one-to-one basis, even if it's just spreading the kind of work that we're doing to a wider and wider circle of people. That's something that I can do that's within my realm of possibility. And it's different for everybody. One other thing, since we're talking about this, I really want to emphasize is the first skill that we talk about when you move from self-compassion or the self-cultivation series into relating to others is what we call impartiality and common humanity. It's We're not trying to cultivate forgiveness, gratitude, empathy, and compassion for our circle. We're trying to extend those far beyond our circle. So that the very first thing we do when we begin to look at those things is break down our bias, break down our natural in-group, out-group bias. These are things that are built on evolutionary foundations. They have been useful in survival in the past, but they're not useful in a world as small as ours, where we are all living together. And so, really emphasizing breaking down our own implicit bias, enabling us to see that your life is as valuable as my life. The person who lives halfway across the world who I've never even met, guess what? Their life is as valuable as my life, and their life is worthy of my compassion, just the same way my own children's or my life is. So, really, it's important that we 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 rest the entire program on the foundational pillars of common humanity and interdependence. And everything really comes back to that.
You know, as you're speaking, I think the other thing that comes to mind for me is that when we have compassion for other people, and that my life is important, your life is important, all of our lives are important, that there's a thread then that connects us, because sometimes I think what happens as well is people will say, oh, well, that happens there. Oh, I'm in California, that's in Minnesota, that's not here, right? So that's just there. And so then we can put ourselves in different silos and buckets and
Yeah.
not see the interconnectedness of us all, or that there's policies that we have, whether we live here in the United States or we live in another country, and those policies sometimes also, of course, very much so impact systems and then
Yes.
impact individuals. And so you might say, oh, no, that doesn't impact me. Well, it does. So, I think about our Second Amendment, for example. I'm not against our Second Amendment at all, but yet I am for reasonable background checks, and for people who have mental health challenges, that they would not be able to easily get firearms that could cause harm to others. So we might think that's not really our problem, but all of it is interconnected. Because when you are an innocent person going to the grocery store or going to work, and all of a sudden you become one of those statistics, it's not a statistic. It's a person who's a father, mother, daughter, son, who's part of a wider community and a family. And so I
Yes.
think, to me, that's what comes to mind,
Yeah.
because it's also this other aspect. Yes.
Well, we do as part of when we begin to think about interdependence, and we're in skill 6 where we look at forgiveness and gratitude. We have people work in teams to draw what we call an interdependence map. So what they'll do is they'll select seemingly a mundane object, like my water bottle here that I'm drinking a bottle of water. I might just pick that, and then I start to map on a piece of paper everything and everybody that was necessary for this water bottle to exist. And I kid you not, by the time it's done, there are billions of people identified on this map, right?
Mm.
Because who there's a bottle, someone had to manufacture the bottle, someone had to source the materials, somebody had to figure out how to create this label, somebody had to design the label, they had to go to school to learn how to do many of these things. This bottle had to be transported, and it might have been on a truck, and if that truck had tires, somebody had to make the tires, somebody had to invent the tires, somebody had to it doesn't take long before I can, again, this goes back to the logic, right? Common sense. I can use logic to connect this bottle of water to millions and perhaps billions of people I've never, ever met. And without this, those people, I wouldn't be able to sit here right now and enjoy this water, which is grounding me, and it's helping nourish me. And yet, what do I normally do? I normally look at this bottle and say, "Oh, I bought it with my money from the grocery store, and now I'm going to drink it. It's just me, me, me." But if I recognize that there are billion, and that's just the bottle, that's not the computer, that's not my phone, that's everything is interdependent. And every one of those people, not only do they matter to me in some abstract sense, they support me in my daily life, in my flourishing. I'm grateful for them.
And so people who take the CIT training, and any one of our people can just come to your website, and anyone in the world can take the training.
Yep.
So you do different exercises so that you can really illuminate how we do have this interdependence in these kinds of exercises. So
Yes.
it's a very dynamic training it's not only listening, but it's really participating.
Yes.
And really creating your own self-awareness of where you are in the whole scheme of your presence on the planet. I mean, that's what I've gleaned from the program.
Not surprisingly, you summarize it better than I can. So
I don't know if that's true, but
it is that sense that we want to not just give received knowledge, but to also help people attain those critical insights. And then going back to the very start of the program, give them ways of practicing.
Well, so before we move into the UNESCO project, is there anything more that you'd like to say about CIT to help our listeners understand if they did decide to take the training, what they would be engaged in?
Yeah, absolutely. So two things. One is we've trained people from all over the world. Over people from over 65 countries have participated in the training. In the kind of standard course, which is the facilitated course. That's different than what I'll tell you about UNESCO. And we have facilitators in 20 different countries around the world. And if people come to our website, which I can give the address at some point, they can come to the website. First of all, you can download all the materials free of charge. And then on there is information about joining a course. We actually have a course coming up in a couple weeks with the Charter for Compassion, who's one of our important partners. And then in the course, what you'll experience is some level of received knowledge. So I might say to you, this is what we mean by gratitude. This is how we define it. Here's some of the science of gratitude. And that's all great. Okay, I get that in my head, and that may or may not have any impact on me. But then I want you to go through an activity that brings an aha moment where I, for myself, can say, wow, that's a light bulb going off. And that's like that activity I talked about, the interdependence drawing. We don't go in saying, by the way, a billion people have to, help me get this water.
Yes.
We say, draw a map. And they're like, by the end of it, they're like, oh my God. And then we lead a practice during the session, but then we give people recorded practices, written practices, and then they go home and they take this with them. And we always pair people up into partners, which we call accountability partners. So to help people practice in between sessions. So
and this is all online, and this is online, right? They don't come in person.
We do in person, but we also do hybrid, which is online via Zoom. We were, as I tell people, we were Zoom before Zoom was cool.
Yes.
We started doing trainings online about 3 years ago already. So
well, you were the first person that I learned Zoom from because I took your training. So
yes,
so that was
thank you.
Thank you so
wonderful.
much for letting me have an idea of what that might be like, since I live so much in Zoom right now.
Exactly.
So can you tell us the name of the website? I'm going to have you repeat it at the end, but it would probably be good to hear it now as well.
Yes, it's compassionate. So not just compassion, but compassionateintegrity.org.
Okay.
So compassionateintegrity.org. And if you go to that website, you can get all the materials and everything more than you might want to know about CIT.
And I'll have Dr. Michael Karlin repeat that at the very end of the show as well. So now I really want to hear about the self-directed version of CIT, that UNESCO MGIEP. So tell us how it came about. Tell us about it. How exciting. So over to you.
It's funny because I know that you were at the C-Learning launch, right, in India.
In India.
Well, right after that launch, Brendan and our partner at the Charter for Compassion met with the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education of Peace and Sustainable Development, which is MGIEP. They are a research lab of UNESCO, the United Nations cultural organization and education organization. And in that meeting, they said, well, we're looking for a compassion training program. Their model is specifically around wanting to teach mindfulness, empathy, compassion, and critical inquiry. And after that, they turned it over to me and I started talking to them. And essentially, they came to feel as if this was the best program out there. And they wanted us to start training their youth ambassadors. And their focus is really 18 to 34-year-olds around the world. So we started doing that. We trained youth ambassadors. We were doing all this via Zoom. We went to the first ever World Youth Conference on Kindness and trained youth ambassadors there. And it was going really, really well. And then the director looked at me and said, by the way, we want this to go to like hundreds of thousands of people. Like we're targeting universities in India that have 400,000 students. How many facilitators do you need to train them? And I just looked and said, not the number we have, nor I think we'll ever have, that's going to be a long-term project. So he said, could you make this a self-directed program that would have support of facilitators if necessary, but largely could be self-directed? So we said yes. And long story short, 18 months later, in January, we launched it. We have a completely self-directed version of the course where somebody can go from the foundational concepts all the way through the end of skill 10 in 14 individual modules. Each module takes anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on how the person engages with it. It's got all of those components I mentioned where we give received knowledge, there's activities to help you get critical insight,
You
and
have
there's
to be
practices.
connected to UNESCO in order to take advantage of this self-directed course?
No, anyone can go there. If you go to, this is another website, but if you go to mgiep.unesco.org/CIT, you will find an entire website that's run by UNESCO that is dedicated to the course, and you can access it free of charge through UNESCO. It's open to anybody. They are in the future going to be offering it specifically through university campuses and looking at working with youth NGOs and teacher networks. And then we are also working at bringing it to market, so to speak, through our community. And so we'll have it in multiple different places. We're in the midst right now actually of translating it into Spanish. We have a partner in, again, through the Charter for Compassion, we have a partnership with Encuentro Mundial Valores, which is the worldwide human values. I'm maybe translating that a little bit poorly, and the Human Values Center, and they've launched it with 3,000 people in Monterrey, Mexico, and plan to launch with another 10,000 people in May. And so what's beautiful about this is the scale we can achieve, right? Is that
the scalability is incredible, and I'm also kind of embracing this concept right now because I hadn't realized this part is that the community resiliency model skills is a part of this.
Absolutely.
And so that means there are thousands more people who are going to be receiving the community resiliency model skills as part of this self-directed course.
Absolutely. And it's amazing, again, whether somebody is coming to us from India. We're running a training, right? We just concluded a training for South Asia that included several people from Myanmar in the midst of all that's happening in Myanmar. And I can't tell you the amount of times people say these skills, all of them, but they come back to the CRIM skills over and over again. They've helped me deal with literally a military overthrow of the government, of not knowing if they would even have internet access to join our course or not. From when we had to accelerate the ending of the course because they knew next week there would be no internet anymore. And they're using these skills of grounding and resourcing and tracking the concept of the resilient zone to understand what's going on in their body, to help regulate themselves. I just can't tell you the impact that you're having, as you already know, but yeah, so our goal is to take this and scale this to places and people that otherwise wouldn't have access to it.
Well, one of the things I'm also thinking, that next week is Earth Day. And as you're saying this, that means we also have a cadre of people trained in these skills all over the world. And one of the things I've been so concerned about, and some of you may know that I'm a member of the International Transformation Resilience Coalition, I'm a founding member, is that, how do we deal with the human toll of climate change? And I'm really, all of a sudden the light bulb went on in me right now, that aha moment. This is one of the ways that we can help people when they're dealing with changing climates, the droughts, losing their livestock because of the climate change. That, as you said, we can't oftentimes change some of those forces of nature, or whether there's a coup in your country, but that if we have these skills, then we can manage ourselves and perhaps be part of the system change and solutions in the future that can make a more compassionate and equitable society. I mean, that's just that impact of that, Michael, is really, really impacting me at this moment.
Well, and
Yes.
if I can say one more
Yes,
thing on that,
please,
is that
please do.
these skills, I think, can help people in two ways. One is it helps you manage through these things that you don't control, but it also, when you talk about climate change, when I start to see the whole system and I recognize, going back to my water bottle again, that there are likely people in these climate affected countries and places in the world that I didn't care about, right? It's all about my consumption and it's not affecting me. Well, guess what? Even if it's not affecting me the way I conceptualize it, when I begin to expand my consciousness to recognize that everybody on the planet is part of me, then that can maybe fundamentally shift whether I care about fixing climate change, right? Because I recognize it affects everybody.
Right. So just applying these same concepts to what we talked about what's happening in Minnesota right now. I mean,
Exactly.
there's so many different things that happen in the world that we can take this to and look at it from these lenses. That
Absolutely.
could be, I know that, Michael, that you're an optimistic person, and I tend to be
Yes.
so too, that it could possibly lead. I know, we also appreciate the Dalai Lama, that there will be an appreciation of the scalability of the potential of compassion and ethics all over the world. Well, as boy, this time has gone by so fast. We have
So fast.
just a few minutes left. So is there a parting thought that you would like to say to leave with our audience today?
Yeah, I think maybe it's that change is possible, right? I think so. We have a couple of, I think, mistaken assumptions. One is that people are either compassionate or they're not, they're forgiving or they're not, or that they have some sort of set level and that you can't expand upon that. And I think the science is bearing out the fact that you absolutely, with practice, with education, you can expand on those. And that's then fundamental to changing culture and to shifting towards a more compassionate and just world. And I think that's why scale is so important to us, and this idea of scale and practice, because we want to hit a tipping point. It doesn't take everybody, it just takes enough. And
Right.
you can really shift consciousness when you do that. So that's really my hope and prayer. And I'm optimistic because I know we can do it, right? People do change, they can change. And if we do that, if we hit enough people, we're going to change the world.
Well, it sounds like you're already changing the world. And I'm so glad to have been a partner along the way with you, Michael Karlin. And also I'll do a call out to Brendan Ozawa Silva too, and
Yes,
meeting
you
both of
should.
you.
Yes, you
Yes.
should.
Since he's impacted both of our lives in a significant
Absolutely.
way. So can you say again the website so that people know how they can get in touch with you?
Yes, so it's compassionate, COMPASSIONATE, integrity, INTEGRITY .org. I can't believe
All
I just did
right.
that. So compassionateintegrity.org. You can also send an email to info@compassionateintegrity.org if you have a specific question or want us to follow up on
Great.
something.
So Michael, Karlin, thank you so much for being present with me today and
It's been a
to
joy.
share your wisdom with our audience. And I want to just remind our listeners that, as you journey through your life this week, try to think about also what else is true about your life, And I know that we're all challenged by the windstorms of life. And for some of us, this is a very, it's a tenuous week in terms of the outcomes of the trial. And I just think what's happening in our country. I also, my next door neighbor is a police officer, someone who I really appreciate and care about. And I know that there are many police officers who are really people with integrity, and that they suffer too. And that's not to say that I don't want to minimize the suffering that's been caused at the hands of law enforcement at the same time. But I also, I guess, maybe being compassionate to all, what happens when we do that. But to remember what else is true this week as you go through your time. And I also want to let you know that next week, for the acknowledgement of Earth Day, I have Dr. Bob Doppelt, who's a leading expert on the psychological impact of climate change, and the person who created the International Transformation Resilience Coalition will be my guest. So blessings to all of you, blessings to you, Michael, Karlin, and all the work that you do in the world. And I know that we will cross paths again, if
Very
not
soon, I hope.
If not in Atlanta.
Yes.
Over a cup of coffee, it will
Yes,
be
I would
on
hope
Zoom.
so.
Yes.
You're long overdue for a hug.
I know. That was my last trip, I
know.
left on the 13th. Yes. So
you might have been my last hug before the
That's
lockdown.
true. Oh my gosh. There you go. Well, I hope to have another one again. So
Thank
blessings
you
again.
so much.
Yes. Thank you, listeners. And thank you to our sponsor, the Trauma Resource Institute.
All right. Awesome job today. Great show. We're all clear.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, Elaine, thank you so much.
Welcome.
That was just absolutely wonderful.
That was fun. I always enjoy
so much
this.
fun. Oh my God, it's such a...
Our Facebook listeners could be still on. I'm not sure, but because I know that I turned mine off, but it may be going on. So if it is, amen, hallelujah.
At least
to
people
that.
know we were really having fun. We weren't just pretending.
We weren't pretending. Well, I'll definitely have you on again. We'll have to talk about how it proceeds. I'd love to hear more about the self-directed course, since it just started in January.
I'd love to bring some of the folks on who are doing this work in Africa and Myanmar and all that stuff, and they can share.
Oh yeah, no,
they
that
can
would
share
be great.
firsthand the impact that you're
That
having.
would be great. So we'll think about having a show with some of them about what the work, how the work is multiplying in the different places around the globe. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, people are all over the world. So
well,
thank you.
I wish I could have asked you this question but I'll ask it again.
Yeah.
Did you ever imagine when you changed your life course in 1999 that this could possibly be in your future?
No. But now, of course, when you look back, you're like, oh, of course, it's exactly where I was meant to be.
Yes.
But back then, not a clue.
No, because people asked me that too. I said, no, I didn't. I just kept one foot in front of the other and tried to say, what seems to be true about how to help people in a maximum way and how to make things simple and accessible so that they could be grasped and shared. So absolutely. Sounds like we've both been able to accomplish that. So we'll see what else is in store for us.
In many ways, thanks to you from my perspective. So thank you so much for everything.
Well, you're welcome.
I'm going to go teach my class, but I want to talk soon, and thank you so much for having me on.
All right, we'll talk soon. Okay, blessings to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.